All right. We're recording live from the ozone. Welcome, everybody, for the three people that hopefully will watch this recording if it sees the light of day. Let's jump in with our guest today, Daud. My name is Usman, and we're basically just going to jump right into this, right? First of all, small pleasantries. How are you doing today?
Doing good, doing good. I was saying earlier it's been a pretty Monday Tuesday, but for the most part, powering through almost at the finish line. We're recording right now in the evening after work.
Yeah. So you just said it's been a pretty Monday, Tuesday. What does that
I mean, just like,
mean?
there was a ton of traffic, a little bit extra brain
Hmm.
fog in the morning, maybe an extra cup of coffee was needed, and a bunch of
Yeah.
errands. I had a video shoot that I was at earlier today, and a bunch of traffic on the way back. Just one of those days where it felt like there was a lot of friction.
Okay. So maybe that's just an as appropriate or an appropriate segue into the conversation. So I'm basically going to start this off by asking a sort of a high level question,
Mm.
and then we'll see where the conversation goes. And I'm going to lean on my immigrant background, and I suppose that would be your immigrant heritage because you don't have an immigrant background because you're born here, but you have an immigrant heritage. I suppose by definition, everybody, well, most people do. Well, let's not get into that rabbit
It's
hole.
either one or the other, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Heritage or
Well,
background.
yes. There are people, there are the natives, but that's a whole other, chapter and
True, true.
sobering chapter. Anyway, so and given that I have the immigrant background, I am on the Gen X side of the fence. And so we call it, what are you, Gen Z, right? You're Gen Z.
I would say like
Yeah.
Gen Zennial 99. We're
Oh
kind
my
of on the
gosh.
cusp of millennial
Wow.
or Gen Z. It's really hard to put me in a bucket, so
Wow. Really, really leaning into your identity there.
yeah.
All right. So, you know, tell me this. What is it that Gen Xers don't get about the Gen Z immigrant heritage group? I'm sure
Mm.
there's more than one thing, but what's one thing?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. I don't know if it's always been the conversation, but I've always just found it interesting how much conversation there is in difference about the differences between the different generations. I'm not sure if it was the same for you growing up, where there was, a big, oh, boomers think this versus millennials think this. But I bring that up to say, I think it's interesting, one, to say that we're being centered in those conversations as much as we are. I at least appreciate, Gen X for making an effort. I would say there's certain Gen Xers who know the Gen Z and the millennial plight, better than others. So that understanding is definitely there. Something that I was kind of struck by recently, I think just, have kind of come to terms with at various points in my life, is how much information we have been bombarded with as a generation. So I was born in June of 99, and there's definitely I was still that era where we remember Sunday cartoons and all of those classic things. At the same time, I didn't necessarily have MySpace and dial-up internet. By the time I was, in high school, Facebook was like already, fully established. So I'm giving all that context to kind of say it's something I think that really bears reminding is just how much of an information overload there has been for this last generation. And I think lending to that just how malleable I think a lot of our perceptions are. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of different places I want to kind of take the conversation, but like everything that's happening on college campuses right now, everybody's like, oh, these woke factories, and look at what's happening here. I would say we live in a time where it's not just a fad for a lot of people. There's so much information out there. And I
Uh,
think, if anything, I want to tell the older generation just how deep our conviction kind of goes, because kind of the convictions we have, we found through, all of this noise. And again, there's so many different angles you can take at that, bringing it back to the immigrant story. You know, it's interesting. I didn't go to Pakistan for nearly a decade in the middle between I think it was 2012 to 2023 when we went. And in that time, you know, so many of my perceptions of Pakistan were shaped by watching these white boys on YouTube vlogging and, you know, whoa, this is the friendliest street vendor. And, you know, so again, it's interesting to just I think for all of us to kind of just come to terms with the information and attention economy that we live in, and the fact that we are just bombarded with new information every day, and just how, again, how malleable our worldviews are, but then at the same time, how they can solidify and become rigid quite quickly as well.
Mm.
So long
So
meandering answer there to say.
yeah, yeah, lot to unpack there. All right, so where do we start? Well, I will give a Gen X perspective, and I've had this conversation. People that know me have heard this multiple times from me, but I'll say it again for the benefit of our three-member audience. Um, I've always likened the fact that as parents, um, it dawned on me after my kids were grown up that or while they were growing up, that we're at war with ourselves. Gen X, well, actually all parents, but specifically our demographic and cohort of Gen X parents. And the reason was because we basically wanted two different objectives, and we worked really hard, at least as hard as we could, to try to achieve those. But fundamentally, those two objectives were at odds with each other. And so the first thing is we want to give our kids opportunities that we didn't have. Well, our parents did the same thing. So I think they also probably had the same experience. Um, so we want to give our kids all the experiences we didn't have, and yet we want our kids to have the same set of identity or moral values that we have.
Mm,
But we are shaped, our personalities are shaped by our experiences, and our environment is what makes us. So by definition, by giving or striving to give our kids what we didn't have, we fundamentally made them different people. Um,
mm,
Not to say they're completely different, but there's certainly you kind of pushing out of the Venn diagram,
right.
and I think that is at the heart of a lot of these discussions. But frankly, from that perspective, if I think about it, it's not so different from our parents either. Now,
Mm,
our demographic, we just thought like, oh well, but we're much hipper and cooler than our parents, and so we're going to just kind of grow up with their kids again, depending on households, and everybody's got a different story, but by and large, maybe parts of that are true. Um, but what you can't escape is generation gap. I mean, that's just the world, as you said, the world has changed and continues to change. And so you mentioned college campuses. I mean, I don't know, man. I don't know. I don't know if I don't want to sound insensitive, but like based on what I know, yeah, it's just it is a tough, tough, tough time to go to college these days. I mean, this is the whole, oh, this is the best time, the best days of your life, and you'll have all these experiences. I mean, you would think that might still be true to some extent, but you can't escape the gravity of the world situation, and it's just hitting you from every angle. So I guess from that perspective, like, does anything resonate with you about the how different you feel than your uh well, like your parents are probably going to watch this at one point, but like how different you feel than your older generation.
mm.
um and also if there's any sense of malleability or any kind of do you find yourself culturally almost switching into a pleaser mode at times? And again, it's different for everybody, there's going to be different experiences and stuff, but like, do you want to comment on that aspect of it?
So, could you ask the last bit of the question again? Because I think a lot of it kind of resonates with me, but I'm kind of trying to figure out which thread do I want to pull at.
So I guess what I was asking is, do you feel from your perspective that indeed there is a difference in identity between your generation and the one above? And then also, is there some sort of a pleaser mechanism
Mm,
that you sometimes have to fight off, where you want to say one thing, but you necessarily say another thing. And I will give away the sort of the answer, like a spoiler alert. We went through the same thing,
mhm,
but I think it's fun. It's somehow it feels different, at least for us, because from the Gen X point of view, you haven't had the experience or the benefit or the pleasure of being on the parent side of it.
mhm.
I've played both sides of the coin, so in some
Right,
way, it's almost interesting how history repeats itself, but now you find yourself on the other side.
right. No, it's interesting because the part of the question that I keep kind of holding on to is, like what are the expectations of me as a Pakistani American being born here? And so, growing up, like something that I've really been deconstructing a lot in my adulthood is, you know, religion versus what were the cultural aspects of what I was raised with, right? And then in a similar perspective too, I remember, anytime we would see any bases out and about, we would automatically cling to them. And then growing up, I just had this assumption of like, okay, so all of these other families move and operate exactly in the way that we do. And obviously it's just taken time and context to kind of understand, the background and the experience that we're talking about now. There's families now that are reliving that currently in this current generation. And so for me, there has been kind of a lot of different pieces of reckoning, especially now, like living in Houston. A lot of my friends, some of them were born, in Boston and are now settling in Houston. I bring that up to say, I've been also at the same time kind of toiling with myself recently of like, what does it mean to be an American? Is somewhere that, I want to start, maintain, continue my career. I've really been considering, other countries for the first time in really in my adult life. And so all of that to say, recently I really had the thought of like, man, how privileged am I to even like be able to denounce like the American side of my identity, right? And then at the same time, there's certain rooms that I walk into where you don't feel Pakistani enough, right? Um, and so it's a really interesting kind of dichotomy. I think that like just bringing back to that first question where it doesn't even feel like I can claim loyalty to either place. And it kind of just feels like I have loyalty to ideas and learnings and just assumptions that I've had of the world.
Oh,
And
I
I
love that
would
line. I love that line. Loyalty to ideas. That really resonates. I want to come back to that, but go ahead. I want to cut you off,
totally,
but wanted
totally.
to recognize that.
And so, I mean, that's where I would say I think things are really, really shifting. And I think that's, it's impossible for any of us to really have a pulse on anything else happening in the world, let alone, what is happening within a generational schism between all of us.
Huh.
So, and then to the whole people pleaser side of things, I mean, yeah, definitely. It's interesting here in like my Houston friend groups. We have certain friends who are able to put on that mask entirely, where like, dude, you were born and raised in Houston, and he's putting on like an extra like fobby, I hate to say, like accent when talking to uncles, right? And it's
Uh,
like why are you pulling this out, right? So there definitely is pressure at times to show like, oh, like I'm OG, I'm authentic. And that I think people show to various extents, and it's interesting to see in other people. And again, I think that just kind of comes back to all the various experiences happening in the Pakistani diaspora kind of at once, right? Where there's people who are like what my father experienced in the 90s going to USC, there's people who are experiencing that now in, the 2020s at U of H and, in my friend group. That's always something to kind of keep in the back of my mind is, like, why am I complaining to my friend who is on a green card about, man, I hate this country and I want to leave. So again, a lot of unconnected thoughts there, but it is really interesting to, again, not necessarily I always say it, but it feels like stolen valor, honestly, a little bit sometimes. To be like, you know, celebrating Independence Day when I am just Pakistani by connection, but I don't think I've been in Pakistan for any Independence Days. Right, but to continue that tradition here, and now that I'm at the age group where I'm looking to start a family myself, I'm starting to think like again, what is that going to look like for the next generation? And I think really that's why it's an interesting time to have this conversation with Gen Z and millennials, because however it's manifested for us, we're kind of, I think, now at the stage of being, the adults that our kids are going to look up to. And so regardless of how set our opinions on these topics are right now, it's kind of, and as malleable as I feel like it will be in the future, it's important to kind of have, solid footing on your identity going into this next chapter.
Okay. So, interesting. Like I said, I wanted to come down to the loyalty to ideas, but I got to respond or acknowledge. I love the certitude that you have about raising kids and what you're going to have to say to them. Again, having played both sides of the coin, I will tell you uh, that is, again, as my dad used to sometimes just kind of laugh when I talked to him and be like, "Yeah, now you know."
Yeah.
And it's almost like part of it is no matter how prepared you think you are. Uh, uh, I think that's the biggest change in life. People make a big deal about getting married. Uh, my personal experience was that marriage was getting married was like sort of relatively easy. Say
Mm,
relatively, I'm not saying it's easy, but having kids is a game changer.
mm,
That being said, the reason is, and so this is where I want to kind of go into the loyalty to ideas, because I mean, again, I don't want to say we grew up because obviously I can't speak for an entire generation. I can't speak for like, a few billion people. I can't even speak, basically beyond my own experience, maybe my siblings or some cohort. But we did grow up in a cultural aspect where you didn't question authority.
mm,
You just like, we talked about this and there's something that we unpacked when it's like when our dad told us to go stand somewhere, you just go stand somewhere. Now, my dad was very forward thinking for his time, and so we actually would timidly maybe ask why, and he would kind of indulge us. But generally speaking, there was just almost like a you don't question authority,
mm,
um, and that's no longer the case, at least in our demographic. In fact, I think I went out of my way to try to indoctrinate and inculcate like independence and independent thought, and so
mm,
now I find myself whenever we have a difference of opinion, just like, yeah, so how's that working out? The independent thought is exactly what you wanted. So again, sometimes, sort of be careful what you wish for, but that's not
mm,
necessarily a bad thing. And I think like that's kind of where the whole idea of loyalty to ideas should be, that is certainly there. So I think that's an evolution of just a loyalty to a place. What is Pakistan? What is America? I mean, is Tucker Carlson American or is it Rachel Maddow or is it the
mm,
right? Is it the left? It's just anybody can put on the American flag on their lapel. What's Pakistan? You can wave the flag.
right.
Are you with Imran Khan? Are you with the army? Are you with what have you? Are you a peasant there? Are you a landlord?
Mhm,
So moving up to ideas is certainly like one step. I think the more interesting thing is being able to evolve your thinking and your ideas,
mm,
because I think that is something we don't do enough of at all. And so introspection and being able to question, it's like, well, these are the assumptions and this is the worldview that I was taught, that I grew up with. Is that valid? What have I learned that might invalidate it?
mm,
And it's funny because again, bringing religion and theology into it is gonna, can open up a whole other can of worms. But there is that there's always that push and the pull of like, because even in the Quran, I mean, there's an acknowledgement of just don't do as your forefathers did because they knew
mhm,
no better. And somehow that truism always seems to be there because it's almost like this. It feels like evolution is anthropological evolution is like an Escher staircase. We're supposed to be going upward, but when you look behind, it almost feels like, wait, we were just down below. We're
yeah,
supposed to. So
yeah,
in the current time we find ourselves in America and the same thing, like I mean we're talking about like race and like just deep like is where we are. It's like, wait a minute, did somebody just like roll back the clock? I thought we had like gone through all this stuff, but apparently we hadn't. I mean,
Hmm.
the reality is we hadn't. I mean, there was a certain section of society, and I think that is where a lot of the frustration comes from. It's like you were force-fed things, and not everybody bought into it. And so, we're seeing the result of that. Um, anyway, I'll stop. So it sounded like you had something to jump in on about the Escher staircase.
No, honestly, just spurring a whole lot of thoughts in different directions. But yeah, that's something that I really had been thinking. No, honestly, I'm having so many disconnected thoughts right now. But that is a
Well,
really
lucky for you, you're in the ozone, so you can basically just
just
go for it,
ramble, just shoot for
just
it.
ramble.
No, I mean, something that I've been obsessed with recently has just been like ancestry. Where did we come from? What am I more intelligent than my ancestors? I mean, like all of these, I think, questions that people
Would
have
you like to name ancestors that you think you're more
no,
intelligent?
no, no,
Or
no, no, definitely not. But just again, is I guess like it. Yeah, I saw a tweet the other day that was saying something of, like you can call anybody in the world these days. You can, start a business from wherever you want. Like, people from at any point in your bloodline would fight for a day in the life of what you're living right now, and you're complaining about your bills. But you paraphrasing, about what it was. But I was really thinking about it of, am I making the most of my opportunities right now in this given time in our total scale of human history? And like something side tangent thought I have a lot is there's a movie, Dune that came out with Timothy Chalamet a few summers ago. Have you seen it?
yeah, that's a one and two.
Okay, great. So I mean, I saw one and two as well. I thought they were great, but the biggest thing when I was watching a movie like
There's
that
a
is the
crappy
first
version
one.
of that from the 80s, right?
I've actually seen it. The
Oh, okay.
oh my God, who's the director? It's David Fincher, right? It's like really, really bad CGI and
Yes.
yeah, so but I
Anyway,
mean there's
Dune.
so many fascinating concepts in Dune in general, but I think what the first Dune movie did really well is really made me feel FOMO for the future. Like darn, like I'm never gonna get to see humanity really like spread across the stars in this way. And again, it's a disconnected thought to be, man, what would my ancestors have done with access to the internet? Is it really an abundant wealth of information and wisdom, or is it brain rot, Because honestly, the way that I interface with it most of the day, outside of like emails and the regular productivity and humdrum business, it's not like I'm seeking knowledge on my phone more than I'm seeking the brain rot and the mindless scroll that just tends to find you anyways. So that's where I think it is interesting again to look at that staircase and wonder, like I've been given all these tremendous gifts, all these past generations have, built brick by brick by brick to put me in the situation here where, I can be looking here at my iPhone 15 and know like, oh, I had a few iterations before, a few iterations before, a few iterations before. And there was a point where I feel like even in my life, I wasn't as accustomed to just having nice things in general. And so there was a time where I feel like if you had given me this current iPhone 15 when I was in eighth grade, I would have felt like the world is my oyster and I couldn't do so much with it. Having such a good camera in my pocket and all of these capabilities. Again, I keep circling around the thought of I think that is really just weighing heavily on a lot of people these days of, man,
Hmm.
we should be living in this utopia. I have all these resources. And people are just feeling down, I feel like, across the board, or
So
I
I
feel
think
like
so.
everybody's getting introspective.
Yes, agreed. And I think this is where, for me, it is impossible to dissociate, right, the theology from the philosophy from the reality. In other words, what you're describing is in some ways it's almost like a search for meaning. What does it all mean?
Mm.
Um, one of the, Kung Fu Panda. I remember when the girls were growing up. I randomly retain moral lessons from these random movies, and so
Oh, it's an
I don't know if
amazing
you remember.
trilogy.
You remember? Well, I forget the trilogy. I think I just saw the first one. But like what I remember out of it was the mirror inside the box. Like he's like looking for the secret to make him the greatest warrior of all time or something like that. And in the end, he finally finds this box and he opens it and it's just like a mirror in there. And so the message is it's just in you. Everything is in you.
Mm,
And so again, I think that extends to where we find ourselves. Uh, um, life just is. Happiness, sadness are just filters that you put on top, depending on how you choose to process that reality.
mm,
That's an excerpt from the book that I never published, or basically only wrote one page for. But the point is that like that is so true in everything that we do, and then to the point of like we are in an environment. You call it brain rot. It is brain rot, but at the same time, we're using the internet. Here, this fantastic software that we're using to
mm,
record this podcast. We're having a great conversation that we would not have been able to had without this technology. And so that's a productive use of it. We could have also just been sitting there not talking and just binging some, you know, low quality stuff on Netflix.
right,
Netflix has good quality, but low intellectual value.
right.
And so I think that is where seeking that meaning and sort of and then going back to the ideas, we have these notions of religion. What is religion? Well, you know what? I mean, you're more religious than I am. You got a beard, I don't. So I don't know if I can actually grow one. I don't know. Maybe these days it might actually come out. I always struggled with it. But the point again, random point. What
Say
I'm
try
saying
it.
is like you know, um, the point is that we need to challenge ourselves to try to do better. And I think like as a result, societally, where we have found ourselves is what we valued at the end of the day was only money to a large extent.
Mm,
And we're finding ourselves at the collapse of democracy in the United States, right?
mm-hmm,
Because everybody's bending at the knee because everybody's worried about the billions and the hundreds of billions or the trillions of dollars that are at stake. And when that is your only moral conviction, you stand for nothing, right? That being said, I will echo another thing that you said earlier, which I wanted to make a point on is that we are spoiled. We're talking about the end of democracy. Like, dude, just, you know what? Allah shukr, we ate food today.
mm,
There's a lot of people that didn't. We are spoiled rotten. And so our sense of expectation is so sky high that when it's sort of dialed down from like perfection of 99.9% and what we're used to, you're just like, oh my gosh, the sky is falling. Yeah, no doubt
mm,
about it. We are from a marketplace of ideas and how institutions should be working. We're certainly in a bad spot. Don't get me wrong, but should we leave the country? Where are you going to go? What are you going to do?
mm,
I mean, you still, well, you know what? We had the No Kings protests. Get out there. Let's start spreading ideas. Do something productive. Do something meaningful. You know what? Amass your own pile of gold so you can live the golden rule. He who
right.
has the gold makes the rules, right? So I think, like from that perspective, we got to be careful. And I'm trying to do my level best to also channel a sense of optimism
Mm,
out of all the doom and gloom that's out there and be like, well, you know what? Yes, easy to just sort of curl up and say, oh my gosh, all is lost, everything sucks. And like, what are you talking about? I mean, you
yeah.
got like, count your privileges, count your blessings, count everything that's going right. And then basically, nobody's going to live forever.
Mm-hmm,
So, what did you do with what you had? At the end of the day, at the end of your life, you're going to be able to look back and say, what did I accomplish? How did I make the world a better place? And again, I think we got to program ourselves. And this is where the interesting part comes in because the immigrant mentality is so driven. The sense of success is only you drive Mercedes. How big is your home? How many bedrooms does it have?
mm,
Right? You got to get beyond that. And again, maybe I am being, sort of, maybe we've gotten that out of our system. And for others, people still have to go through that. But enough people, you know who you are, people out there. If you're listening to this, there are people. I know you got to get past that notion and start to think bigger than yourself. And that's really what the problem is. That we have become so much thinking about ourselves. I'll pivot this way.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with neoliberalism?
Yeah,
You
definitely.
know, the neoliberalism, right? Uh, it's a philosophy, basically, it's a worldview popularized, I guess starting in the 70s, the 80s. Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan in the 80s were like, sort
Hmm.
of poster child for that. And a lot of neoliberal ideas and neoliberal philosophy and policies, a lot of it are attributed, again, I just mentioned Thatcher and Reagan, like two kind of, right-wing conservative politicians. But the interesting way to think of it is it's actually two sides of the same coin. You kind of hear like, oh, establishment Democrats and Republicans, kind of the same thing. I think neoliberalism is an interesting concept because, on the one hand, the fiscal part of neoliberalism is roll back the government, cut all, bureaucracy, and let
Mm,
the marketplace take care of itself. But on the personal side, there's a neoliberalism of like you and your quest to like discover yourself and like your desires and your needs are the only thing that matters.
mm,
And that's actually has kind of been pushed from the sort of the liberal side of the political spectrum. So in that way, is the concept of neoliberalism, which is almost like I just think of myself, and like we don't need the sense of community or like a greater sense. And again, I'll say that there's always a balancing act. You can go one
mm.
way too hard, and there's always discussion to be had. But I think like what we're seeing is that sense of despair is because we stop caring about others. And this is what I find so puzzling about your generation, because you're responsible for your entire generation. You do know that,
Exactly.
right?
As the
So, and
spokesperson, okay.
as a spokesperson, that you're right. At a big picture level, it's amazing. I'm actually truly inspired. Like, it's like the young generation, it does give me hope. Sometimes I look at it and it's almost like, oh wow, like, people are really brave, they really care. And yet sometimes I look at people at an individual level that just like there's zero personal skills, zero sense of empathy. And it's almost like you're able to care about the big picture and the big world, but like nothing about just like a human connection in real life.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. Um, yeah, I don't know, you just have to look at the rest of the positive that could come from it. Because I think about it too, right? Of like, did your generation have a Greta Thunberg? You know,
No. Nope.
right? But then it's yeah, I think it's interesting too of, to all the bad things that social media has given us, I think it definitely has given a lot of people who want to be champions and be champions for the right reason. And don't get me wrong, there's definitely people, chasing clout and influence for the wrong reasons. But yeah, I mean, I think I maintain a level of hope for it. I think specifically, from the time period that you're talking about with Reagan and Thatcher and the birth of neoliberalism too, it's interesting because the flip side of it too is, we need to spread democracy and all of these ideals to everybody else in the world. And it is focused inwards on ourselves, and there is that level of isolationism, but there is also that level of global cooperation that was needed to make their, like, Henry Kissinger's version of neoliberalism work. And so, I don't know, it's interesting now, again, I think to that earlier idea of like loyalty to ideas of, I think the pendulum is going to swing, right now we're seeing it definitely swing conservative. I think you're definitely going to see it swing back. I think something that all of our generations kind of need to reckon with, because I think, I would say like Gen X, got to live through the end of the Cold War and everything. But really, there has been relative peace, I would say, in the global order. And I would say, regardless of, if this poses itself as a full-on in a US war, or if it's just whatever this next Web3 4, version is with AI and everything, I think just embracing the fact that the world is going to continue to be on this pendulum. Right? And I think that has kind of been something that both of our generations kind of need to come to, and I think are coming to a reckoning with, but I think just needs to be understood more just across the board, is that pendulum's going to keep shaking, and it's not like it's going to end with this, proper populist liberal, wave, and then everything's going to be fine and it's going to be a magical ending, right? Things are can continue to teeter and totter, and I don't think there's like again, coming back to that Dune analogy earlier, like I would love to live in a future where one day there are no governments and there is a united Earth, you know, government,
It's
and
never going to
where
happen.
it's never going to happen, right?
It's
And
never going to
so
happen.
you just have to live with those assumptions of, okay, if this is the playground and the chess set that we're left behind with, what are we going to do with it? And that's where, another, I was listening to NPR today and they were talking about like the rise of the nuns in religious surveys, where people are just saying no religion, and whether that means they're agnostic or atheist or just increasingly meh, whatever, it doesn't really matter to me, which was the third option that was given this year on the survey that NPR was reporting on. And so I think it's just important to at least hope that in this new world, that people don't get too nihilist, that without faith, that there's still enough love for just the human condition and everything else that we've created. And so I think it's interesting where, again, coming back to the internet, it can open you up to all of the beauties of humanity. And then at the same time, you see, school shooters that are radicalized, certain communities that they're able to find online. All of that to say, I
Yeah.
think it's just going to be a really interesting time. And we just all have to appreciate it's not going to be there's not going to be a happily ever after. And the global order, I don't think is ever going to feel as stable as it has been, I think, for the rest of our lives up to
Mm.
this point.
Yeah. So just to go back and explain why I say I've come to that conclusion, in the last few years of it's never going to happen like this mythical world peace order that you see
Yeah.
on a Dune movie. And I'll tell you, as human beings, it is our fate, like the entire reason that we're on this earth. I'm going from like Islamic theology, and again,
Mm.
I'm speaking like a Islamic theologian. I mean, I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night. Does anybody get that joke? And again, I think my girls are just kind of like sick of that joke, but I've explained it to them. But I think it's pretty funny, and I'm sure there's some people hopefully that laughed at that because they remember those Holiday Inn commercials where it's like the guy's like performing surgery,
Uh,
and he's just like, "Oh wait, are you Doctor So and so?" He goes, "No, but I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night." So again, it's just you got a good night's sleep and makes you smarter. So again, I have to explain
okay,
that
I
joke.
had
Yeah. And the
okay.
commercials didn't age all that well. I tried to dig it up on YouTube and they kind of suck. Like, but they were a lot funnier at the time.
Mm.
Right. Anyway, the thing is, from a human condition, we are responsible for our actions. And it's almost like that is the very essence of the test that we're in.
Mm.
And by that definition, just like not everybody is going to sort of be on board with that. I mean, think of it another way. Um, Again, if the prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like the with the message of God, could not convince people that he was in direct contact with, who are you or I or some Hollywood director that's going to like change humanity based on some like utopian. Like, so that's what I'm trying to get at. Like, we're sort of caught in this. Now, what we do have the ability to control ourselves and our own choices and our own mindsets. And that's why I've also really started to lean into that. Yeah, you know what? You can't give into the doom and the gloom and the despair. You got to keep
Mhm.
optimistic because optimism is part of the faith, it's part of the religion, right? Because if you, so that's all there. The other piece of it is, uh, we don't have time to delve into this. Maybe we'll talk about it in another session. But like there is a distinction. AI is all the buzz right now.
Mhm.
I do a lot of crosswords. One of the favorite activities is like kind of doing the crossword puzzles. And I can certainly see how, yeah, after a while you start getting good at it. It really is, it's just pattern recognition, right? You see a clue with 7 letters in it. 2, 4, and 5 are filled in, and there's the definition, and your brain starts working. Like you just see it. As basically AI is like a glorified, just basically
The
pattern matching
recognitions.
on. tons and tons of data. What AI doesn't have, and what again, what I fundamentally believe will never be there, there's a distinction between tasks and like intent.
Mm,
Like as a human soul, you have the ability to make a decision and discern between right and wrong, right? And I don't believe that you're ever going to be able to manifest that in a full way. Maybe you'll come close. I'll give an analogy. Does anybody believe that a Boeing or an Airbus is an actual bird? No, it's not a bird, but it does fly, and it does give you the ability to fly from point A to point B. So in that way, you're mimicking a bird's behavior. Maybe even a bird can't fly, 8,000 miles in one swoop, but you're still not a bird. And I think like
mm,
that's kind of the distinction I'm making. Like we might get closer and better, but you're not going to be able to conjure up an actual soul because that is a different dimension. And again, those are like that's a whole different topic from for another day. But all that is to say that our process and a filter and kind of how we're processing things is absolutely important. And I think like, just even talking about it,
mhm.
thinking about it is better. Like I'm sorry that I took away your, Instagram scrolling time tonight, but I appreciate you, kind of taking the time out to sort of be here. I, by the way, am a social media Luddite. I am not on social media. I just I obviously I kind of got on early on, but I don't
Mm,
know. I am also disconnected. I find out about what happened in the world through my wife and other people in my life because they tell
mm,
me what's out there. But you know what? Whatever. I guess I have the privilege and the advantage of being connected to people that will tell me what I need to know. I'll take advantage of it, but it does, it is brain rot to a large extent
mm.
because it's hard to control. It's kind of like eat right and go to the gym. Who doesn't understand that? But execute on that.
Exactly. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, one of my favorite questions to ask people these days is, like what is your media diet? Because there is just so much that we consume these days anyways.
Mm,
It's interesting, even on this conversation, I'm reminded like, I've kind of been all over the place. But somebody was telling me the other day, conversations feel like they're kind of in some ways dissolving down just into, okay, I read this interesting. I'm going to reiterate it
mm,
here. I read this interesting. And it just becomes a series of, okay, these are my topics of the week, and there's a circulation that happens there. I think, again, just increasingly, connecting it back to earlier, thinking back to our ancestors, like, I think, man, like, did they have much trepidation around each little decision that they make? And it's important to think about that because, like, as you're saying, of course, you don't want to be nihilist. You should have the best, future positive outlook. But if you're kind of stuck in that, paralysis of decision making and fatigue, then you kind of get into that doomer mindset and that doom and gloom, right? And just that earlier point that you were saying too, of like, I also would love to see a global world peace. I think it's also just so impossible. A book, The Sapiens by Yuval,
mm.
forgetting his
Yeah.
name, but like the one of the big takeaways that I took from the book was he was arguing, like as from our opposable thumbs or the wheel or fire, none of these were like the greatest advancement that we made as a species. The greatest advancement was the leap of fiction that we could come up with a story or a collection of ideas and collectively buy into that, whether that's religion or that's just a regular story that you're telling or it's laws. But it kind of boils down to everything now, right? And again, like not to keep trying to hammer this point, like that's where I think like the loyalty to ideas kind of comes in, where we have so many in this day and age, it's really important to be intentional, like you're saying, with what are we re-examining, and then what are the leaps of fiction that we're willing to take. I think leap of fiction comes from the legal sense, if I'm not mistaken, where the leap of fiction is the set of assumptions that you have to make to start building a case and that there that you can prosecute against this case that's made there. Maybe I'm misperforming now, but
Mm. Yeah, I mean, again, I think there is always some value, well, in most ideas. I don't agree with like the or like I don't agree personally with the religion is a fiction, the mindset. But
mm,
I can see the fiction or the collective buy-in. Like, what a collective buy-in to fiction is that we've all
mm,
bought into? What's a US dollar? Is it
right,
just, it's just fiction, but we all believe that it has value, and that's what gives it value,
right, right.
right? So that's definitely a collective fiction. You can't eat it. You can't. It's not going to keep you warm. It's nothing, right? Um, and there are other. Sure, there are social binds and there are rules and things and we find, but the interesting thing is a lot of ideas will dissolve when you apply the same scrutiny. So it's almost like, the
Mm,
whole notion of, oh, well, this is, I don't know, atheism is not a religion. Well, it is kind of. Atheism is itself a religion. But when you present that it's not a religion, and you sort of base arguments based on top of that, that I think like distorts a little bit. Like I think it's fair to say, well, atheism is a belief system. And it's a belief in that there is no God, but that's a belief system. So anyway, that's a bit of a tangent, I guess,
Yeah, I
to
mean,
see.
honestly, I don't mean to say like leap of fiction as in, religion itself is fiction. The idea is more so that you can convince somebody of something else, right? Like
Sure,
even our basic laws of, don't steal from a store is a leap of
sure.
fiction, right? Of you have to create the rules to create the assumptions, say this
Yeah.
is wrong. Mm.
But like Trump is a great businessman. That's not a leap of fiction. That's an actual cosmic truth.
Yeah, I mean, of course.
Yes,
Well,
we have to
we're in
acknowledge
good
that.
company here, yeah.
Yes, okay. Just make sure because the internet's is listening and you'll get reported back to
Right,
Intelligence
right.
Central, right? Um, all right. So let's wrap this up and kind of
Mm.
be like, okay, so do your best flawed uh summary, your best AI summary of like what did we talk about and like, what are the three takeaways that you're getting out of this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think grasp at a lot of different ideas, and I'm still kind of reckoning with it a little bit. What in your identity, one, does it mean, I'm Pakistani versus I'm American, and where does that kind of line up? Okay, sorry, let me be more eloquent. So pretty much, and I think the big takeaway at the beginning was kind of understanding those generational differences in our identities. Again, your immigrant heritage versus your immigrant background. Thought that was a really interesting starting point. And from there, we talked about, the generational schisms between our two generations, life experience, but then also just proximity to time and history have kind of given us different assumptions and backgrounds. I would say the big thing that I wanted to point out for our generation is we are inundated with so much information and that we're constantly having our assumptions being challenged. I think something, again, now kind of diverting from the summary a little bit, but my hope would be, people always say, oh, college is that period where people take on all of these liberal and social ideas, and then they tend to become more conservative with time, and particularly fiscally conservative once they start earning. That's the big argument. I would say, again, as malleable as people can be in this day and age, I would really like to think that that's less the case this generation than generations past. I'd like to think that, it's less of a fad because we've been exposed to more information. And so I want to believe that those convictions are a little bit deeper held and that, people aren't going, our generation won't switch up once there is some sort of wealth transfer. We'll kind of, keep the eye on the prize, so to say, on some of the social changes that I think as a generation we more or less want to see. Um, Outside of
I mean,
that, yeah,
it'll be interesting to compare to the flower power generation of the 60s, right? The late 60s, the
right.
anti-Vietnam War movement. That was like the amount of mass social unrest that that generation saw. We're nowhere close to that, at least at a cultural sense. But I don't know. Yeah, you're right. I mean, we'll see how deeply held these views
Agreed.
are.
Agreed. And it's always a pendulum, right? Coming back to that NPR survey from earlier, I think I've had this assumption for a while, but they kind of confirmed in this report that the people who are religious are becoming increasingly religious, right? And typically that can be associated with people who are more conservative or religiously
Mm.
dogmatic, and that can have, you know, again, ripple effects in itself. So I don't think anything, like I said, that we're gonna land this in 20, 30 years and it'll be great looking back at it. But yeah, I guess so coming back to the summary from that generational divide, we kind of talked about, scale in human history, ancestry in general. What was the type of staircase that you referred to?
The Escher staircase. Have you know what I'm talking about? The Escher, the painting. Have you,
I'm
you
I'm picturing like just a loop staircase.
No, okay, so just Google it after you're done. The Escher, Escher.
Okay.
It's a, it's a, I forget what his first name was. He's just a painter. And there's this painting with a
Ah, very
staircase,
Squid Games.
and it's like looks like it's going up, but
Yeah.
it's not. It's like it's just again, it's
It
an
looks like
illusion.
Hogwarts or the Squid
Yeah,
Games
but the point is, if you stare at it enough,
lobby
it's almost like it's just like this infinite loop, even though it seems to
going
be going up, but
nowhere.
it's not really, it's going nowhere. So again, what I was referring to is it feels like we're making forward progress, but then when you look over your shoulder, it's like, dude, it feels like we're like at the same spot that we just started off at. Like, have
Right.
you actually even climbed any levels here?
Yeah.
Um, anyway, great discussion. Thanks for your time. There's a whole lot to unpack, and I think like that's what we hope to uncover in future episodes of From the
Stay
Ozone.
tuned.
Hope to see you back soon. Hopefully, it didn't scare you off. And, if you find time from your doom scrolling on the internet, maybe you can come back and we'll do this again sometime.
No,
Cool.
absolutely. Very honored to be here for the first episode. Much appreciated.
All righty. Talk to you later.
See
Office.
you later.